The Sunday school lesson for August 25th, 2024 is Josiah calls the people back to God. 2 Kings chapter 22 verses 8 through 10 and chapter 23 verses 1 through 3 and verses 21 through 23. This is an audio reading of the lesson. Discovery, 2 Kings chapter 22 verses 8 through 10. Recovery, 2 Kings chapter 22 verse 8. In the 18th year of his reign, Josiah sent Shaphan the scribe to Hilkiah the high priest to determine the sum of silver contributions made at the door of the temple. This was to be used to repair the house of God and pay carpenters and masons, verses 3 through 7. It was while this recovery work was going on that Hilkiah found the book, the scroll of the law of Moses in the temple. Many scholars think this was Deuteronomy, the fifth book of the Pentateuch. Hilkiah gave it to Shaphan the scribe, and he read it. He must have been at least somewhat aware of the importance of this lost document. God expected his people to live by the law given to them at Mount Sinai through Moses. The fact that it had been ignored and misplaced shows how great the spiritual decline was under Manasseh and Amon. Report, 2 Kings chapter 22 verse 9. Perhaps it was a matter of doing first things first, or of saving the exciting news until last. But Shaphan made a matter-of-fact report to Josiah that the king's servants had gathered the money in the temple and given it to the tradesmen for making repairs. It was only then that the scribe brought out the scroll the priest had found as the repair work began. Reading 2 Kings chapter 22 verse 10. Shaphan may have been inwardly emotional as he presented the recovered law of God to the king. Josiah instructed Shaphan to read it to him. Josiah was shaken when he heard God's law read, for it was immediately clear that his nation was guilty of breaking God's covenant. The king commanded Hilkiah, the high priest, and others to go visit Huldah, the prophetess, to see what the Lord had to say about this. Was there any way to avert divine judgment? Huldah told the delegates that God would bring judgment on Judah for its sins, but that the tender-hearted Josiah would not see this judgment. He would be allowed to finish his reign in peace, verses 11 through 20. Determination, 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 1 through 3. Covenant read, 2 Kings chapter 23, verses 1 through 2. Josiah had been 8 years old when his reign began. He was 21 years old when God's law was read to him. He would live 13 years more before being slain at Megiddo at the age of 39, chapter 22, verse 1, and chapter 23, verse 29. During those years, God used him to bring about many improvements in the spiritual life of Judah. This time of spiritual resurgence began with a great convocation ordered by King Josiah. He sent messengers throughout Judah and Jerusalem to tell the nation's leaders, to gather before him in the capital. The setting for this assembly was the temple. The king went to the temple along with the elders from outlying areas. They were joined by the inhabitants of the city, priests, prophets, and anyone else who wanted to attend. We do not know how many people were involved, and it makes us wonder how everyone could hear the king when he stood up to read the law of God. It has been suggested that he could have had other speakers strategically located among the multitude. They would hear him speak and relay the message part by part to outlying members of the congregation. Covenant made. 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 3. Josiah stood by a pillar of the temple and made a solemn covenant with the Lord, promising to walk in his way and keep his commandments, testimonies, and statutes. We are not sure how to clearly distinguish these terms now, but together they refer to all of God's laws. The king said he would keep all of the law's instructions, and he intended to do this with all his heart and soul. The intention of the congregation that day was to go along with Josiah in his determination to keep God's covenant. They stood to show they agreed with him and had the same desire to keep the covenant. The custom of standing to show approval still persists. Whenever a performance is especially noteworthy, it is rewarded with a standing ovation. People in a courtroom stand as the judge enters and sits at the bench. Everyone stands as the bride comes down the aisle on her father's arm. It was on the basis of the people's promise to follow God's law that the king initiated a series of spiritual reforms in Judah in the years that followed, verses 4 through 24. Josiah was adamant about destroying the trappings of paganism and idolatry. He destroyed the pagan shrines and brought to an end the work of idolatrous priests. The heathen altars built by Solomon were destroyed. Members of occult groups were put away, along with other abominations. This illustrates what just one person can do to bring glory to God if he is in the right position and is willing to take a strong stand for the Lord and his commandments. Passover commanded. 2 Kings chapter 23 verse 21. An integral part of the Mosaic law was the celebration of various religious festivals throughout the year. One of the most important of these was Passover, which commemorated God's deliverance of Israel from bondage in the land of Egypt. It was held on the 14th day of the Jewish month of Nisan, our March or May. It was followed by the 7-day feast of unleavened bread, Leviticus chapter 23, verses 5 through 6. The entire 8-day festival eventually became known as Passover, Luke chapter 22, verse 1. This feast, along with the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles, was a pilgrimage festival. According to Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16, all healthy and ceremonially clean male Jews were expected to appear before the Lord in Jerusalem each year for these 3 feasts. Since the people of Judah had ignored the law, it was natural that they would also neglect the religious festivals or just go through the motions in a perfunctory manner. When the book of the law was discovered, it led to renewed interest in the festivals. Josiah did not just suggest that they be celebrated again, however. He commanded this to be done. Celebrations among believers in the current age of grace also serve as educational tools. We attach great significance to communion services, baptisms, weddings, and dedications of new structures, ordinations, graduations, and other events. Even funerals can be celebratory if viewed as the transition of saints to their heavenly rewards. Passover held. 2 Kings chapter 23 verses 22 through 23. These verses declare that the Passover held in the 18th year of Josiah's reign was unlike any that had been held since the time of the judges and during all the days that the kings of Israel and Judah reigned. This raises the question of how elaborate a religious event ought to be. Some groups feel justified in spending a great deal of money, time, and effort to put on a spectacular display. Others believe that a religious event should be as simple as possible in order to show humility and frugality. Decisions have to be made on the basis of careful thought, prayer, and the Spirit's leading. In this case, it certainly appears that the Lord approved of Josiah's outstanding celebration of Passover as the king reinstituted this festival in Judah. The Lord also must have been very pleased when Josiah put away all the mediums and spiritists, as well as the household idols found in Judah and Jerusalem. Verse 24. We are not given a definition for put away, but this could have ranged from banishment to execution. In verse 25, we find an extremely favorable evaluation of King Josiah. This young man was declared to be a better king than any before or after him, the comparison probably being to all the kings of Judah and Israel. He was best when it came to devotion to the law of God that was given to Israel at Mount Sinai. We would do well to leave a similar legacy behind us. The greatest gift we can leave behind is a life devoted to God and His kingdom. Conferring such a legacy actually begins before our children are born, or in the case of other family members and friends, before our initial contact with them. Thank you so very much for listening. Join me soon for the next audio reading of the Sunday School lesson. Stay safe and may God bless.